Hello, welcome to today's webinar brought to you by KeyLime Interactive. My name is Kelly Narcisse, and I'm going to be your host this afternoon. Thank you all for joining us today. We're excited to talk with KeyLime Interactive's VP of User Research, Eugene Santiago, about how research is changing, how KeyLime is ushering along with this change, and the impact this is having on product design as a whole. Eugene's been with KeyLime since the very beginning. He joined the team in 2009 when we opened our doors, and he brought with him over 10 years of user experience expertise. He's what we like to refer to as employee number one here. He leads our research team and manages both qualitative and quantitative methodologies. Eugene has always been recognized for clients for his ability to quickly spot those patterns and provide actionable recommendations for the trends that he sees. Just before passing it off to Eugene, I want to quickly cover a couple of guidelines to keep in mind throughout the next 30 minutes of this live webinar. We want this talk to be interactive, so there is 2 channels where you can ask in real time during the webinar. You could post your question in the chat window in the platform, and we'll receive it there, or follow this conversation along with us on Twitter using the hashtag KLIEvents. Any questions posted on there we're going to be monitoring as well. We have a lot of time at the end of this discussion for a Q&A portion, and we're going to do our best at that time to get to everyone's questions. Any questions we may not get a chance to answer, we're going to email them to you directly following this webinar. The webinar will also be made available on demand in the next 24 to 48 hours. So without further ado, let me go ahead and pass it up to Eugene here.
Okay, thank you, Kelly, and thanks again to everyone who's joining us today. Before we get started, here's a brief agenda outlining what we'll cover today. I'll talk about a growing problem that KLI faced at the conclusion of 2015 and early 2016, what we created to address this issue, and how things have been working out for us so far. I'll also get into a specific case study so you can get a better sense of how we've implemented this approach in practice. Following that will be a brief recap of what this approach is, Quick Insights, and the steps involved before opening it up for questions. And we're also part of a global consortium called UX Fellows. We recognized, the importance of sort of needing to be everywhere at once so that we can best hear the voices of all the people to make good decisions on how to best suit the needs of a global multicultural audience, and for that reason we joined UX Fellows a couple years ago. And additionally, we serve Fortune 500 companies, mid-sized companies, startups, and not-for-profits in all industry segments. For us, we specialize in giving a voice to the user regardless of who that user is. And the last thing that I want to mention is that we're not a one-size-fits-all, cookie-cutter research shop. We don't have a menu of services that we simply choose and we make work, but rather we create solutions, research approaches to get to the heart of the problems. And we're ultimately known for being flexible and creative, and it helps us produce efficient and robust research results. Okay, so a little history in terms of how we got to where we are today. All right. So as I mentioned, as 2015 came to a close, we took a look back at the trends that we started to see in the marketplace and what 2016 was going to look like for us. And so in doing that, we noticed that for many of our clients, their needs were shifting. In many instances, the demand to execute UX in a shorter time frame was increasing. And unfortunately, this wasn't a one-off scenario either. There was every indication that this request was here to stay. But while clients, ever demanding, wanted things faster, they still expressed or required the need to get actionable insights. So while this cadence of work was at first very exciting for us, right, as an agency, we're always welcome the additional volume. What we did see, however, was that the investments that were being made in research weren't growing at the same pace as the demand was. And so while the demand to do more testing more often increased as UXers, within organizations and our clients, they wanted agencies like us to manage this shifting need, but using the same resources, right? The same money. And so after much thought, lots of brainstorming with the team, Quick Insights was born. At a high level, Quick Insights is a research process that's fast, simple, but it's still actionable. Now, this is not guerrilla testing, right? We're not talking about interviewing coworkers or peers or those who are on the team but not directly involved with the product to weigh in. Right? This is a deliberate research approach aimed at really trimming the fat. The goal is to get down to the nuts and bolts of what the client's needs are, talk to real target users, and then quickly synthesize the data so the product team can incorporate, iterate, and keep moving. And to date, it's actually been really quite successful for us. Quick Insights has been able to align to the demand of lean UX testing while remaining budget conscious. And it also has provided our clients with agile iterative insights that they can easily incorporate into their aggressive development schedules. And it's afforded our clients who employ this research program the ability to create experiences that more closely align to their users' expectations and needs. All right, so now I'm going to get into some details about a very specific success story that we have. Hopefully everyone is still with me. All right, so again, in 2015, a company approached Keyline with the following ask. They were undertaking a global redesign of their e-commerce site. This particular organization had a mature perspective on user testing and really valued user testing overall. For them, they were taking on the challenge of redesigning their entire website, which has a global presence. But they also had a desire to incorporate usability testing throughout their development cycle, and quickly came to the conclusion that the traditional means of conducting user testing wasn't going to meet their needs, right? And so when I'm talking about sort of the traditional test, I'm talking specifically about coming in, listening to what area of the site they want to focus on, scoping that out, going through the process of design, data collection, 2 weeks or so of analysis and then reporting, and 4 or 6 weeks later, you have a deliverable. For them, they knew right away that wasn't going to work for them. So ultimately, the approach that we implemented was highly collaborative between our research team and their multidisciplinary team, which consisted of UX researchers, designers, and developers. The engagement called for rapid, iterative UX testing, which we ultimately ran for 12 consecutive weeks. Each week, we ran a new test, right? And to make things more complex, this client had the need to actually run multinational testing. So each week, we actually tested in 2 countries simultaneously. And for this particular approach, we ultimately opted for remote moderated sessions that were task-based in nature, and that really helped us sort of keep up with the fast pace that the client was demanding. All right. So I mentioned before, right? Each week we executed a round of testing that focused on a specific UX issue that the team wanted to address. It ranged from things like simple A/B or preference tests for photographs to more complex things like understanding the differences between cultures when it comes to terminology. But at the conclusion of each week, Keyline led an immersive workshop with the client product team where we shared with them what we had learned. This workshop consisted of the following phases. We first spent time communicating the first layer of analysis that we had conducted. This typically included who we interviewed, what their experience was, and the issues that they encountered. We wholeheartedly understand that our superpower as a research agency is in teasing out the insights after gathering the data. So prior to the workshop, the research team would devote a full day to synthesizing the findings so that when it came time to lead the workshop, we spent roughly 15 minutes communicating the findings, and then the majority of the session really working towards solutions with the product team. These workshops are not like your typical report readouts, right? This is all about getting work done, not just transferring knowledge from one group to another. During our solutions-driven exercises, we would employ all manner of different techniques, that we sort of have in our wheelhouse. So things like affinity clustering for categorizing findings. I'm not sure if folks are familiar with rose, thorn, bud. We would use that for codifying findings into positive, negative, and items that potentially had potential. We would use importance matrices for plotting items by relative importance, typically, importance equated to the impact to the experience, and then difficulty would equate to the effort or the cost to implement. And we would even do experience diagramming, right, to better understand users' journeys when it called for that. And the goal here was all in the vein of understanding what the challenges were and the opportunities that they presented. And so from those activities, we would transition into a phase where the product team really could focus on ideating with this newfound information. And so they would do so whether it was through sketching, storyboarding, schematic diagramming. The great thing was that the group of individuals that were ultimately responsible for this particular user experience was leading the charge, and that was really empowering for them. And we would always conclude our workshops with a recap of what we learned, what progress was made, and made sure to be very clear about what the next steps were. Okay. And so at the conclusion of this particular research program, in this scenario, we had actually accomplished a number of things that we were especially proud of. So the first is that we accomplished what we set out to do, was to meet this new challenge of successfully executing a lean research approach that still provided, the deep insights that our client demanded. We provided our client with the necessary information to constantly refine their experience while also uncovering new insights that would impact their global strategy moving forward. And we helped a multidisciplinary team gain a deeper understanding and empathy for their users, which in turn led to them creating a better experience. And on the right here is a quote from our primary client, as well as one of the outputs that their team put together at the conclusion of this 12-week period, where they took an overlay of their homepage, which was was our focus. On top of that, overlaid all of the user testing findings that we were able to uncover over that 12-week period, and they also included their analytics data, as well as the business requirements. And this ultimately created a really powerful tool for them internally to show all of the, the powerful learnings that they had over that 4-month period, as well as built a really strong case for what their funding for research was going to look like for the year to come. All right. For us, we really believe that one of the most critical components that really makes this all work is the collaborative workshops. We've run variations of this, of Quick Insights with templated reports as the typical deliverable. And while those, have been successful, this more immersive experience and the resulting buy-in that you get from them really, moves the chains. During these workshops, our job is to sort of bring this new, these trusted insights that provide the product team with a valued perspective, and that's the perspective of their users, to that conversation. And then during the workshops, our role primarily is to moderate a session where that product team leads the creative solutioning activities. It's really amazing when you look at it objectively how this format has led to a more engaging experience for our clients. Instead of product teams being told what's wrong and how to fix it, the product team themselves are able to lead the discussion about what to prioritize and how to address the shortcomings. I know for us, and I'm sure for many of you, UXers on the line, you've run into countless situations where sometimes it feels like the insights that you provide fall on deaf ears or that they get lost after they're reported. But this experience in particular has been, totally different. It's done a great job of really helping to keep the momentum going, and the insights in particular seem to just stick better with the product team. Okay, So what I'd like to do now is give you a sort of a recap of Quick Insights in general. Again, what it is and how that process typically unfolds. All right, so as I previously stated, Quick Insights is meant to be just that, right? It's meant to be quick. It has been successfully run within a 5 to 7 day window. That doesn't mean that it needs to be, but that's the benchmark. That's the benchmark that we set for ourselves, and that's sort of what we hold ourselves to. Day one typically consists of the kickoff meeting and the beginning of the recruitment process. Generally, during this meeting, we're getting very hands-on, very tactical, reviewing the list of tasks, ironing out the study goals, and confirming the participant demographics. At the conclusion of the kickoff, the scope is clearly defined and is aligned with the client's expectations. Additionally, really important, at this point, in order for us to keep up the pace, all materials that are to be tested have already been prepared and they're ready to go. And with all of these things finalized, we can actually begin recruitment. One caveat is that before this entire engagement kicks off, we typically have our recruiting details. So whether we're using a client list, whether we're managing recruiting ourselves, or we're partnering with a vendor, that's already been decided. This way, post day one, we can legitimately get started. Okay, the second day, when you think about sort of the transition, the tail end of day one and all of day two is devoted to study prep. Here is typically where we create our testing script, our discussion, or discussion guide. We prepare all of the necessary equipment, depending on if we're testing something that's mobile or desktop. And we always conduct the pilot session to make sure that we have, worked out all the kinks. The number of tasks overall we cover in any given session is typically driven by the length of the time allotted, and we generally try to stick to around 30 minutes. We don't put a cap or artificially constrain the number of tasks. That's because in our experience, we've seen that some tasks are very quick, while others take a little bit longer to complete. So we don't position this and say we can only do 4 tasks, because we know that varies, based on the need. Day 3 is D-Day, right? It's data collection. Like any other typical day of fielding, we run through our standard protocol of setting up in advance, and we ensure that participants will attend all their scheduled time slots, which in this case is even more important than sort of your typical maybe 2 or 3 day time frame for data collection. With Quick Insights, we've used a couple of different approaches. We have conducted both in-person sessions as well as remote moderated sessions, but primarily the methods that we employ are qualitative in nature. And like I mentioned, for the case study that we ran, that was global in nature. Many instances we were running sessions in countries outside of the United States, and so in those instances, those were remote moderated sessions. All right, day 4 is devoted to synthesizing the data. So here is when the team sits down, we analyze the results, we categorize the findings by severity, many times using color coding. We create an executive summary. We create any findings artifacts, which many times will include annotated screenshots. And the goal ultimately is to complete the first layer of analysis, so that going into the workshop, we're able to present these insights to the product team, and again, spend more of our time talking about what should happen next, as opposed to spending the majority of that workshop simply talking about what it was that we learned. And this slide here shows a visual example or mock-up of what an annotated screenshot might look like. We understand a lot of folks are visual learners, and so tools, artifacts like this go a long way in helping people understand what it was that we heard or observed in lab earlier in the week. And then the conclusion of this process always ends with the workshop and the delivery. Right? Again, the workshop is meant to be highly collaborative and solutions-oriented. And at the conclusion of the workshop, we generally produce a deliverable that consists of a 2 to 3 page reference guide that details the executive insights, concisely all in one spot. Again, where applicable, we will include annotated screenshots that we've reviewed during the workshop. Any other outputs that come from the workshop, so whether it's post-it notes, potential solutions that the team has come up with during the workshop, that's also part of the package that we hand over, as well as a recap of the workshop, which tries to streamline, the themes that emerged, the prioritizing list and categorization of the issues, and any potential solutions, whether they be sketches, wireframes, storyboarding, or just concepts. To address some of these issues, all of that collateral that comes from the workshop is ultimately handed over to the product team to keep things moving. And then, like other types of UX research, quick insights, can be run at any stage of the design process. So the case study that I reviewed was sort of the perfect storm in that the client that approached us was starting the process, and so they were able to seamlessly integrate quick insights at the very beginning of undertaking this massive redesign. But for others, we've been able to come in at various stages, right? So that from our standpoint, there's never a bad time to get a sense of how users respond to a concept, and so we wholeheartedly believe that and communicate that, whether it's quick insights or other UX approaches. And additionally, the lead time is minimal. Like I said, so long as we're clear about what the scope is, we button things up enough where we can deliver within the time frame that's promised. One thing to mention, though, is that recruiting, as many of you know, can always be sort of a bear in and of itself, and that's why as we are scoping out this project, going through all of the paperwork and sort of finalizing that, we try as best to organize things and understand what we're going to do, because sometimes that will add just at the very beginning of the engagement, to the ramp-up time, making sure, again, whether you're using a list, whether we're doing it, whether we're partnering with a vendor, we want to be cognizant of what their capabilities are, build in time to get that going. But once the program starts, each week tends to run really, really smoothly, with just a few days of ramp-up time. Okay, so that's it in terms of what I have to share. I hope it was helpful. I'm going to pass it back over to Kelly to see if we have any questions, and open up the floor for some Q&A.
Thanks, Eugene. Great job. We did have a flood of questions come in. Let's go ahead and get started with those. The first one was kind of a three-part question that was asked when you were talking about the case study and you were on that slide. The questions were, was the workshop in person or remote? Specifically, did this approach allow the team to obtain the empathy of their users? Or how did this approach allow the team to obtain the empathy of their users? And what was the number of attendees in the workshop, specifically client versus the amount of researchers?
Got it. Okay. So generally speaking, in terms of the breakdown of researchers to client, most recently, or typically, it tends to be the research team is generally maybe 2 or 3 people at most from our side, and from the client side, it's generally more. So I'm trying to think back now. The most recent example that I can recall had about 9 or 10 client side folks. So again, a multidisciplinary team. The PM who manages the product, a number of developers, and some designers as well. And so it's typically that ratio, maybe about like 3 to 1, researcher to a client to researcher. And then specifically for the case study, many of those workshop sessions on a weekly basis were done remotely. We did have an opportunity early and towards the end to do them in person, but most of them were done remotely because we weren't physically located where the client was. They were a international client, and we would use a couple of different tools to help us manage the sort of that interactive environment that we're going for when we do it in person. So we use things like a tool called Stormboard, where it's sort of like a virtual post-it note board where you can share in real time and post findings and really collaborate really well. So we would do things like that to, as best as we can, mimic what that in-person experience is generally like.
Great. Another question that came in: what led you to decide on a remote moderated study as opposed to a remote unmoderated study?
Yeah, I mean, it really came down to what the desired learnings were for a given week. And early on in the process, this client in particular, was really keen on getting richer qualitative insights. So while we've run a great number of unmoderated user research where we include a combination of open-ended questions as well as single choice or multi-choice questions, they really wanted to get more opinions and more qualitative feedback, and so that ultimately is what drove us towards the remote moderated sessions. When we run these types of sessions, we always record them, so the client at times was able to actually listen in during that third day, during the day of fielding, sometimes live, or sometimes we would have a log of the recordings, and then they could watch those at their leisure too, right? So we were working with researchers in this particular engagement, and so they wanted to be more involved, a bit more hands-on, and gain that knowledge firsthand. And so this approach really suited that need very well.
Great. Another question on that: how many participants do you typically include in each cycle?
Yeah. Generally speaking, it's sort of a matrix, right? We always think about the number of people that we can fit within a day. So if we're allotting ourselves a day, there's a little bit of give and take in terms of how long the sessions are versus the number of users that we get. For this particular example, and for many of these, we try to lead with 30-minute sessions, which generally leads us to around 10 users a day. So that's the ballpark, but we can move up and down a little bit, but just sort of understanding as if the demand for more users increases, sometimes we may need to look at the methodology that we employ or the length of time for each of the sessions, which again will then impact how much you learn in each session. So we got to find the right mix.
Great. So we'll answer just a couple more. We're right here at the top of the 30 minutes. But another question came in. How many researchers do you typically have running a project in a week, and how many are involved in data collection, analysis, etc.?
Yeah. So specifically when it comes to QUICKINSIGHTS, we generally deploy a 2-person team, and they split the duties between the data collection and the analysis and any of the logistical things. Again, what really helps us is the prep that goes, that sort of happens during week 0 for getting the logistical things in order, whether we need to reach out to partners to help us in country, those sorts of things. But it's generally a 2-person team for QUICKINSIGHTS. And when we're talking outside of QUICKINSIGHTS, depending on the scope, again, it's always at least 2 people, sometimes 3, depending on the need.
Okay, and we'll make this the last question. How do you handle streaming or recording mobile devices remotely?
That is a tough nut to crack. We do a couple of different things. The operating system that the mobile device is running on will play a factor into this. Sort of the most low-tech way but reliable way is the use of document cameras, not specifically for this engagement, for this particular case study, because it was mostly desktop testing. But we've shipped out, document cameras to people. That obviously adds time, so that doesn't necessarily work as seamlessly with Quick Insights. We've also used a ton of different programs, things like, Team Viewer we've used to help mirror the screen. Zoom is another web conferencing tool that we use that works really, really seamlessly with mobile screen capture and projecting that. Again, it really depends on what the needs are. If it's highly qualitative and what we're testing is lower fidelity, we typically would not recommend remote moderated testing for mobile. You really need to make sure that what you're testing is built out, a bit more robustly. But it's typically a combination of, document cameras or other streaming services that we use. Like I mentioned, Zoom, Team Viewer are two that I can remember off the top of my head.
Thanks, Eugene. So we'll go ahead and end the Q&A portion here. For any questions that we did not get a chance to answer, we'll reach out to you directly, or any questions that you may have on this topic, or if you're interested in working with us on a project with Quick Insights, feel free to get in touch with Keylime Interactive by emailing us at marketing@keylimeinteractive.com. This webinar will be made available on demand in the next 24 to 48 hours, so we will go ahead and send you a link to that when it is available. Again, thank you for your time, and thank you, Eugene. This concludes our webinar for today. Have a great day, everyone.
Thanks.